From Fremont, California, this is the Smokie Podcast, a production of the Smoke Signal covering everything from student life to what's happening in the world, all in short 20-minute episodes. I'm Mahek, Bhora, web editor of the Smoke Signal, and I'd like to welcome you to our 6th episode of the 2nd season, where two of our Smokies will be discussing all things music. They'll talk about how integrated music is in their lives and how it has affected them.
Hi, on this episode of the Smokie Podcast, we have an exciting discussion prepared for you today. I'm Ian Park, the feature editor of the Smoke Signal.
And I'm Jessica Yu, a staff writer for the Smoke Signal. And today we're going to be talking about all things music.
Yeah, I think music is one of those things that I've always really held close to my heart. It's been a really huge part of my life these last couple of years, but really more so since quarantine started, just because I've had so much time to, explore new genres, new artists, and just find new music that I really vibe with in general. I don't know. What do you think, Jessica? Do you think quarantine has kind of changed your listening habits in any way?
Yeah, definitely. More than anything, I think it's just increased my listening amount just because, I have so much time to listen to music. Even in class, sometimes I'm listening to music. And I've gotten the opportunity to just explore outside of my usual genres of hip hop and pop and delve a little bit deeper into some indie R&B or K-R&B or EDM or just things that I wouldn't normally listen to. So some examples of some artists might be Giveon, Jaden, Jeremy Zucker, or just new artists that I've never really tried. What about you? Do you have any that you've listened to since quarantine started?
Yeah. I definitely agree with your idea of trying to find new music and new genres. And that's something that kind of happened naturally to me over the course of the last year and a half or so. I started listening to jazz, which is really interesting because, I've never really considered myself to be much of an instrumental music type of guy, but I found that jazz is super soothing, calming, relaxing, helps me get through my work. But in terms of more mainstream artists, I'd say two artists that I'm really proud of finding and just sort of started listening to are Dominic Fike and Borns. And that's just because their music, I feel I'd say that it would fit under the alt pop rock genre. And the reason I like their music so much is just because it's so upbeat. The beats are catchy, the lines are catchy, and it's just fun, a lot of fun to listen to and sing along sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I think some that I've also listened to in that's a similar kind of genre, Between Friends, the 1975. So I definitely kind of relate to seeing how jazz is really, really popular now too. Even though, a lot of people prefer hip hop, but there's a good balance between both of them. Talking a little bit more about, how music has shaped me, I'm really drawn to music where I relate a lot to the singer. I really like emotional music because of that. So let me think. Some songs that I've heard before that maybe even come up in the radio, if they're really raw, that kind of shows me the art, a little bit of an insight into the artist's life, and I really like seeing that type of storyline. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that really one of the biggest reasons why I love music, other than the fact that it's just nice to listen to, is that it has the power to really uplift and empower people. And I feel every person has their own specific and unique life experiences, and so they may have different artists that they like and that they really resonate with. For me personally, that was Kid Cudi. So Kid Cudi, for those of you who are not familiar with, he's one of those really pioneers in hip hop who sort of normalized, the vulnerability and the really super raw emotions and storytelling that we normally wouldn't have seen, just because that just wasn't the trend in hip hop during the early 2000s. And so, whenever I'm listening to his music, his debut album, Man on the Moon, The End of Day, it's super emotional in the storytelling and the messaging and the experiences that he's gone throughout his life really resonate with me. And it's kind of free therapy almost. I mean, would you say that you have, a number one album that's your go-to album as well, or do you just kind of jump around genres a lot when you're listening?
I wouldn't say number one just because there's so many really good ones. Maybe right now, just like top would be like, let me think. Like Rex Orange County's like Pony, Frank Ocean's Blonde or Chanel. There's quite a bit, so I can't really choose one. It's just too hard. But I definitely see what you're talking about like storylines and how music can bring people together 100%. So like, I guess like a personal example would be like when I see like music that I really like and that reminds me of someone, I tend to, forward that track over to a friend just because like I'm like, oh, like, this reminds me of them. Might as well just send it over. And it's really nice when that person listens and you're able to bond over that. And it's something that kind of sticks with you. Like, oh, I introduced this artist to this person or, something like that.
Yeah. That's something that I literally do all the time. I feel like just because like, all my friends and everybody around me knows me as, the one guy who's obsessed with music, I feel like it's sort of like my responsibility, to like, I guess, spread the word about this new up and coming new artist or even some of my favorite artists. I guess some examples would be like Kid Cudi. When it comes to Kid Cudi and like spreading love and, like paying it forward, like I've shown so many of my friends, like I've introduced them to Kid Cudi and now they're huge fans and like, it just makes me proud. It's just a lot of fun to be able to like you said, like really talk about albums and music. And I'd say that it's probably one of my favorite things ever, just talking about music and really connecting with people over music.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like looking at some of this, like what we've talked about so far, I think you've mentioned, Kid Cudi and Man on the Moon and some of his other songs. And I think personally, like, I've seen a lot of good songs from like Jaden and CTV3. A lot of these artists actually have like a lot in common. Not necessarily like, what they're trying to sing about or anything, but also in like just in a lot of ways. So what are some ways you think like, artists have in common, and what do you think people in the industry right now are doing really well?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Funny you should mention that though, like Jaden. I don't want to make this entire podcast just about like, me fanboying over Kid Cudi, but Kid Cudi is one of Jaden's biggest inspirations. Like they grew up together and like kind of Jaden really started making music because of Cudi. They have a couple songs together. So there's definitely a lot of influence between like the older generations of hip hop or like just pop in general, right? Like artists who kind of start their own subgenres or start something new. Like for instance, in the case of hip hop, it was talking about like vulnerable stories and really personal messages. And so that was something that's new. And a lot of artists are doing that now. To answer the second part of your question about like what I like about music, the music industry right now is that there's so many different artists. Like there's such a wide variety of artists that I can tune into and listen to that are regularly putting out music. And I feel like this wasn't always the case. There's been so much new music over quarantine, even though like not all of it might be maybe like necessarily good or I might not like all the songs that are being put out, but it's just nice to have like options and choices and a lot of variety to listen to,
Yeah, for sure. I think like a lot of artists are kind of like they're exploring new areas that haven't really been explored before. I know like like for example like recently like Lil Nas X or even like Megan Thee Stallion, they're all like making new steps in music. Is there any artist, like new breakthrough artist or anyone that you've been keeping up with that kind of has like this sort of vibe?
Wow. Let me think about that one. I feel like a lot of the music right now is mostly, it just, it caters towards like commercial success. It's really geared towards, selling the most units, getting the most streams, just hitting number one on the Billboard charts. And so I know that this is a critique that a lot of like old head, like hip hop heads and have about music now, but it's just like, they don't make music good or as good as they used to, where, like Kanye was putting out like entire concept albums, storylines that span decades almost. Same with Kid Cudi. And like, you just, we don't see that yet. Maybe that's because a lot of these artists, like I mentioned, are new. But, in terms of like, I guess just having fun with the music and enjoying the music, there are a lot of artists that I do enjoy. So one of them would be Ian Dior. So I started listening to him really. Yeah. So I started listening to him super early when he dropped like one of his first singles, Emotions, I think. And like I really like the mellow type of like song, you know, it gets me in my feels sometimes. So, you know, in that sense, I guess, you know, I do enjoy some of the new music out. I mean, what about you? Like, what do you think? Do you think that there are any like industry or like groundbreaking new artists out there, or anybody who has the potential to do so?
I guess that's like a really good. You really spun that back on me, but
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely quite a few. Like, it's hard to think of it off the top of my head. You know, like there are some newer. I would say newer, not like really new, but like, you know, Jack Harlow, like some of these quote unquote TikTok singers. They're definitely like making some moves, you know, but I'm not sure there's anyone in particular I would say is like, you know, gonna be like really, really big. At least not yet. But I guess like looking at good music it's pretty like depends on the perspective, right? It's more than just like the music, like the catchy beat, or, you know, but it's looking more at the lyrics, the storyline of the person behind the music. And that's kind of what I look for when I look at an artist, especially like you know, when they release videos like GQ's Top 10 or interviews or Genius Lyrics. I like to read those more behind the scenes details so that I can get a better perspective on the music and then decide like if this is good music or not.
Yeah, no, I was literally just about to ask, like in your opinion, like what makes good music? And I think you touched on a lot of the really good points. So I just want to circle back to something that you mentioned where, you know, you're talking about like GQ, Genius, stuff like that. So I 100% agree. I feel like whenever I start getting into an artist and I like their music, and then I might want to find out a little bit more about their public persona or their personality, their character, you know, their life story and their background, because I feel like, you know, it's really hard. I feel like an artist's personality and character can definitely shines through in the music. And I feel like trying to understand, you know, deeper, like what this artist is going through, like why they chose to go into music or whatever, can be really insightful. And so when I start becoming invested in a new artist, I'll definitely like look up, like, for example, like Kid Cudi interviews, Mac Miller interviews, and I'll just watch those for hours on end just to, you know, I guess to feel more of a personal connection with that particular artist.
Yeah. I really like that too. Like one example is like Jack Harlow. Like, not gonna lie, I thought he was like really like a pretty whack artist, but then his GQ popped up on my timeline on YouTube, and I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. Let me watch it. And the guy is pretty funny. So after that, I started listening a lot more to his music, and I thought it was pretty good. So, you know, stuff like that I think is pretty essential to discovering new music.
And I think that one thing that's really interesting now, like more so because of the rise of social media and sort of like the presence of the internet, it's like pop culture and music and the art that we consume are so interrelated. Like the biggest artists are going to be like the biggest hits, you know, on the internet, and like everybody knows about them, everybody's following them, they know every detail of their personal lives. And I feel like that also really plays a big role in, I guess, like the music and the media that I choose to consume. Like, for instance, right, I would say that Kanye West, right? Yeah. Kanye, in my opinion, was one of the greatest artists of all time. He makes great music, sure, but he also has his public persona. And I know I've talked about this before, but, you know, during like, I guess like his peak, I would say maybe like 2007 to 2013, he had this like super arrogant, super, you know, unlikable public persona, but that was just sort of like his character, and he was unapologetic for it. It was sort of like his, you know, his persona, and that's why people actually like loved him, and, you know, he had such a strong cult following. And so I feel like in that sense, artists really do have, you know, an impact on us, not just as, you know, people, but as consumers of the media and such.
Yeah, 100%. I think talking about Kanye a little bit more, you know, artists tend to have a big influence more than just in the music industry, you know, in fashion, in television, in everything. And looking at Kanye specifically, you know, his like Yeezys and what he's done with the fashion industry has really been pretty, you know, breakthrough or like, you know, life-changing for a lot of people. So that is one thing to particularly admire about him. Yeah,
and I think that, you know, when it comes to new artists and like new artists sorry, new artists just in general. Travis Scott is one of those names that really comes to mind. Like he has so many collaborations with so many different, I guess, like brands and like products. It's crazy. Like he's basically marketing himself and his music. And he's using that to like push products. Like for example, like his shoes, like he has shoes, he has his own line of shoes too. He has like Reese's Puffs and like the McDonald's, the Travis Scott meal that was, you know, like an internet sensation a couple of months ago. So yeah, definitely see a lot of similarities there.
I think he also like came out with like a cacti seltzer or something, and that's been like really popular as well. So when things are tied to music, like really famous artists, it does tend to like help you know, that there are other industries as well, and that's kind of an interesting connection that I didn't see before I started getting more into music.
Yeah, and I guess just like one final point, I guess, you know, I know we've talked a lot about this, but I just want to, you know, talk about one more artist and I guess their sort of way of going about doing things, you know, making it more than just about the music. So Childish Gambino, with his debut album, Because the Internet, that was such a success, and it was so new to I guess the music industry as a whole, because he didn't want, you know, his project to be just music, just an album, just track list, right? He wanted it to be a whole experience for his fans. So like what he did was like he had a whole like screenplay for his entire album, and like he had videos, and he literally had interactive like actual like real life locations that you could visit, and those were all part of the storyline in his album. And like for an entire year following or leading up to the rollout of the album, like he would dress up in the same exact outfit every single day for public appearances, just because he was taking on the character of his album. And so in that sense, I feel like more and more, like now more than ever, music is just becoming like such a universal part of everyone's lives. It's hard to escape it, and it really does influence our lives in so many ways that we don't expect at all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely, from what I can tell, like music is definitely a very big part of both of our lives. And we're so glad that we got to share a little bit of our tastes, takes, and inspiration.
Yeah, and for more content by The Smoke Signal, make sure to visit our website at www.thesmokesignal.org. To our listeners out there, thank you for taking the time out of your day and tuning into this episode of the Smokie Podcast. And we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
The background music is produced by Lou Crembo, and the show is edited by me, Mahek, Bhora. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Smokie Podcast, and we'll see you guys next time.